Hello, everyone, and welcome to Out of Nowhere. Well, today's guest is his name is Paul H. Smith. He's the longest serving controlled remote viewer who's active today. Paul began his career as a remote viewer instructor in 1984. He served for 7 years in the government, the Stargate remote viewing program, at FT Mead, an MD from September 1983 to August 1990, starting in the 84 to become one of the only 5 Stargate personnel to be personally trained as a remote viewer. Can we please welcome Paul to the show? Hello there.
Hello, thank you. Nice being here in the UK.
Yes, it is, my good friend. Um, How did you first become involved in the government remote viewing program? And what was your initial reaction to the idea of psychic intelligence gathering?
Well, at the time, I've been in the Army for a while and just finished up with a 3-year tour in Germany with a Special Forces unit there, and then went through a 6-month Army school and then ended up at Fort Meade, Maryland. And what I didn't realize at the time is that I was sharing a wall with the operations and training officer for the Stargate, the Army part of the Stargate program. We were in these townhouses, we call them over here. I don't know what you guys call them, but ours adjoined his. His name was Skip Atwater, and across the street from one of their current trainees. Of course, I had no idea what they were doing. I mean, it was totally secret. Is what we call a SAP, Special Access Program, and no one outside of a limited number of people knew anything about it. And at the time, I'd never put the words remote and viewing together. I had no idea what that was. I didn't know, and they weren't telling me anything. In fact, one time I said, "Well, what do you guys do?" And they said, "We can't tell you." And I said, "Well, I know you can't tell me specifically, but at least which intelligence discipline are you guys in? Is it in signals intelligence or imagery intelligence or human intelligence or what?" And they said, "None of those." I go, "What? It can't be none of them. Those are the only ones there are." I said, "Well, sorry, we're in none of them, you know." And I thought, well, let me think. How can I trick them into telling me something?
Yeah.
So then I said, well, do you do a lot of traveling? Thinking that that would reveal something about what they
Yeah.
did. And they both started to say, no. And then Tom thought a minute and said, well, sort of. Of course, I found out later Tom was doing a lot of traveling, but it was with his consciousness, not
Oh, yes.
physical.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so I didn't even know about it. And then one day they came and knocked on my door. Tom and Skip together, they came and knocked on my door and said, we've been watching you and we think you might be good at what we do. And I said, well, what do you do? Knowing what their answer was going to be. I said, what do you do? And they said, we can't tell you. I said, how do I know I'm going to be any good at it? Right?
Oh,
And they said, here, we're going to give you some tests. And they were like psychological profile tests, personality profile tests, things
yeah.
like that. And they were looking to see if I would at least come within the same general ballpark as other successful remote viewers came in the similar kinds of testing.
All right.
And
Yeah.
apparently I made them happy because I was invited over to their building, which was actually just a 5-minute walk from where I lived. And Tom sat me down and said, after he had me sign this non-disclosure agreement that was more strict than any I'd ever done in the Army before, for the highest levels of intelligence, this was even more strict than those. And he said, our mission here is to collect intelligence against foreign threats using a parapsychology skill known as remote viewing. We're inviting you to volunteer to become a psychic spy. And he said, now you don't have to tell me right now. He said, you can go home. You have 24 hours. Here are the things you can tell your wife. Okay. Obviously, none of them gave away what they were doing.
Yeah.
These are things you can tell your wife. And I said, I don't need that time. I don't need to tell my wife anything. Where do I sign? And Tom was a little shocked when he heard me say that. He's a little shocked. He said, I said, he didn't say, I said, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused here. He didn't say anything, but he didn't know while he was telling me this stuff about psychic spy, right?
Yeah.
That I'm thinking in my head. So a little background, when I was a kid and up, even at that time in my life, I was interested in science fiction, and I enjoyed reading science fiction that involved extrasensory perception, ESP, right?
Yeah.
Like Andre Norton, who wrote about psychic cats, and Zena Henderson, who had telepathic aliens and all this kind of stuff. I thought it was fascinating. And I'd been involved in the science fair project in junior high, middle school for some, that had totally failed. And so I'd come to the conclusion there wasn't anything to ESP after all, right? I didn't know at the time that science fair project was done in the least likely to be successful way possible. So anyway, so here I am listening to Tom tell me this. And in my head, I'm thinking, he's telling me there's a line item in the federal budget that pays to train people to use ESP, to be psychic. I said, there's no way I'm not going to do this.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, God. So what did you speak to your wife when you got back then?
Well, again, I couldn't tell her what I was signing up for, but I went and told her that I had just accepted a new job that was different than anything else I'd ever done or probably ever would do again, that it might negatively affect my career. That was one of the things they warned me about. It might negatively affect my career. And I said, I know normally I would tell you about this and talk to you about it first, but this is something I would do even if you refuse to let me do it. I'd still do it. And so I guess she saw the handwriting on the wall and didn't give me a hard time about it. So
what role did you play in developing the control remote viewing training manual, and why was it necessary at the time?
So I don't know how familiar your audience is with remote viewing at all. Are they pretty familiar with it?
Maybe, but some of them won't know about it.
Well, let me explain a little bit of that first, because that makes it more easy to understand what I did.
Yeah.
Okay? So remote viewing is this, you could call it psychic, you could call it intuition, you could call it consciousness-based skill that once you learn the process allows a person who does it, a remote viewer, to actually perceive and describe events, people, objects, locations that he or she has no connection with otherwise. In other words, they don't know what the target is at first. There's no technology connecting. There are no cameras, nothing like that. It's essentially they're shielded from the normal sensory input by distance, by actual shielding, or even by time. Okay, so it is a form of being psychic, literally. But it was developed in a science laboratory. A lot of good research behind it, and a lot of research trials and a lot of practical applications that actually worked. And that really freaks some people out, particularly the skeptics. They say, that's impossible. Well, I'm sorry, it's not. It's actually been done numerous times under controlled conditions. So anyway, so it's this basically psychic skill, essentially. And it allowed us as military intelligence folks to, and this is kind of loosely said, to extend our conscious perceptions to inside locked rooms or to the other side of the planet, and occasionally even to other places like the moon or Mars. We've done that before too, although for more conventional targets, right? Allows us to do that and actually gain information about these locations, these things, these objects, these people, in a way that would have been impossible to normal human senses. So that's the basis of what remote viewing is. There's obviously a whole lot to this story, but that's enough for now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you share? Go on.
Well, I was going to get into the manual. So one
Yeah,
of the
right.
methodologies we developed, that were developed is called controlled remote viewing. And I'm not going to go into how that's different than the other things, but we were trained by the man who first discovered, developed, invented. I don't know. There's not a good word to describe how this came about. This whole thing called remote viewing. And then he was brought into the science lab, and a bunch of other scientists got involved. And ultimately, they developed this methodology called controlled remote viewing, which is a more rigorous way of applying it, right? And along with three of my other associates, were trained literally by Ingo Swann, the guy who developed remote viewing,
Yeah.
and the scientist that was running the program named Dr. Harold E. Puthoff. Puthoff has become famous in other fields as well, but back then it was the remote viewing world, and we were trained by them personally. And so when I came after the training, I'm at the military unit, and we're actually doing it. I was asked by the people in charge to create a manual that would capture everything that we had been taught by Ingo and Hal. And so that's where the manual came from. It's supposed to, and pretty effectively does, capture everything that we were taught about this, and we're then now putting into practice.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Mhm.
Can you share what the atmosphere was like inside the military and the intelligence community about remote viewing being exploited? Was it met with skepticism, curiosity, or enthusiasm?
Yes, it was. Essentially all of the above.
All the above.
All the above, and by different factions, obviously, right? Different factions and individuals. So when the remote viewing was introduced as an actual intelligence collection tool, there were people who were very strongly in favor because they'd seen it do things that would be otherwise impossible, right? But it was also met by a good deal of resistance and skepticism by some folks who were biased against this kind of thing. A good example is Robert Deutsch. Not is it Robert? I keep forgetting to look up his name. First name I think is Robert Deutsch, who was the director of the CIA at the time they were going to transfer the program to the CIA. Before that, he'd been an undersecretary of defense, and he was famous for kicking people out of his office if they even came in and mentioned the words remote viewing. He was a nuclear physicist by training, and very skeptical about anything that you couldn't measure or look at or whatever, right? And so he was an example of the skeptics that were resistant to the program. And then you had a lot of people who, when they heard about it, military officers and stuff, general officers, admirals, I've briefed, and Congress senators, I've briefed all of those folks at one time or another. And those guys, they were neither proponents nor dismissive. They were curious. You mentioned curious. They were very curious about it, and they were willing to listen to us. So you had all kinds in the military and in the government who were in favor of, rejected it, or were curious about and wanted to find out more. So,
yeah. How did you balance scientific rigor with more unconventional aspects of remote viewing?
well, of course, our job was to use it, to apply it, and we did participate in some research, and the scientific rigor would be mostly involved in the research. Although it did apply in the applications part as well, because it was soon discovered that if you weren't rigorous from a scientific perspective in using it, you failed. So, for example, one of the important things in science research is double blind, right? Where you conduct an experiment where neither the person who is the subject of the experiment or the experimenter knows the variables and oftentimes the intent, because you want to keep that clean, right? That clean.
Yeah.
We discovered that if the viewers weren't blind to the target, that oftentimes it would mess up the process. The reason here, of course, is because our waking minds, our conscious awareness, is in the habit of explaining things. And when you have a relatively low bandwidth, like remote viewing is, your conscious awareness starts to try and explain things, and it usually gets it wrong. We call that analytical overlay, where you're, to speak very roughly, the left brain tries to tell you what's going on, even though it doesn't know itself. And that leads to a lot of noise. We call it noise in the process. So we learned that if you knew about what the target was in advance, the noise level went up dramatically, and it made it very hard to actually get legitimate information. And so that was one aspect of science, the blinding requirement, that turned out to be very important when it came to the operational use of it.
Right. There's a question here from Rebecca. Hi, Paul. Are you able to share anything that remote viewing helped with or solved, etc.?
Actually, I have several stories available. But first, hi, Rebecca. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate that. Let me think, which one shall I tell you about? Well, okay, so I'll tell you one that had actually national level significance. So during let me think if I can get the time frame right. I think it was during the 80s. The United States was trying to field a new intercontinental ballistic missile. We called it then the MX. It was later, once it was fielded, called the Peacekeeper. The MX missile had its warhead consists of actually 10 individually targetable sub-munitions. In other words, you could take out 10 cities with one missile, right? The Russians had these too, and we had developed this one as to counteract the Russians, what they were doing. The problem was that if the Russians knew where these missiles were, and they absolutely would if they were in regular missile silos, we know that even today they have missiles, 2 or 3 sometimes, targeted on our individual missile silos for our Minuteman missiles, right? So the worry was that if they knew where they were, they would take these missiles out before we could use them if we had to, right? So they came up with this idea called the shell game, where they would have like 10 or 12 of these shelters and then a hidden passageway between them, and they would move the missiles around between these things in a random way. And so the Russians would never know which shelter the missile was in. And so that made it much harder for them to target our counter-strike capability, as we called it. Okay. The problem was, so a senior officer in the national security and intelligence community was concerned about this. And so he asked the remote viewing laboratory to see if they were able to defeat the MX basing plan, because we knew the Russians had that ability as well, that they had psychics, they had remote viewers as well. And so to see if the Russians could defeat our plan, this Navy captain asked the lab to research it, and they did research it, and they were able to prove that a remote viewer could indeed 100% of the time, it took a lot of work, but you could do it 100% of the time, predict the correct location of the missile in that whole shelter complex, which means the Russians could have done it too. And there were other factors as well, but when Jimmy Carter heard about this research and he was told about it, he canceled the program because he realized it would be a failure from the start, and it was majorly expensive, and it just wasn't worth us doing it. And so remote viewing directly led to that major national defense decision from a sitting president. So that's one example.
All right, yeah. Were there specific challenges in teaching soldiers and alliance to the trust perceptions that did not come from traditional intelligence sources?
Challenging in teaching the soldiers how to do remote viewing? That's the question. Yeah. Well, no more different challenges in teaching a soldier as teaching a civilian. I've actually had even now much more experience teaching civilians than I have military folks, but I was involved in training every military except for one yeah, every new military recruit into the program how to do this stuff. So I have a good comparison basis. The challenges have to do with just the basis of human psychology, and the social aspects as well. First of all, you have to overcome people's doubts about whether this works or not. Because in our society basically says this is impossible. You shouldn't be able to do this. It's weird. It's scary. It's woo woo. And some people, it's demonology. It's evil. It's whatever. None of that stuff is true, except in a sociological context. But we all have this ingrained resistance to doing something like this. I mean, obviously, there are people out there who've been doing intuitional kinds of things. I hate to say new age because that doesn't really capture it, but these kind of consciousness-based things they've been doing their whole lives, and so they don't necessarily have the same resistance, but the majority of people do. And since we were drawing from the majority of people, right, the people like that, the challenge first was to convince them it worked, and we had various ways of doing that, but the most successful way is to put them in an environment where they have to remote view to get anything at all. And then when they get it, they actually succeed. It blows their minds, as you can imagine. It just blows their minds, and that is a conversion experience in many respects. So
it is, yeah. Another question here from Rebecca again. Paul, does the government still fund remote viewers today?
Hang on one second. I'm writing a note down that your question made me think of. I just thought of another thing in a paper I'm writing based just on something you asked. So that's good.
That's fine. Yeah.
That's good. Okay. Is it still doing? No. Now, I'll qualify that no a little bit. So I know for a fact that none of the military services are doing remote viewing anymore. Okay. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, none of those guys are doing remote viewing. I am pretty convinced that the CIA is not doing it either. And the reason is that I and Hal Puthoff at one point were approached by a senior executive at the CIA and asked what it would take to start a program. And that question alone tells me they didn't have one anymore, right? And that program didn't get started because the people further up the food chain in the CIA didn't want to have anything to do with it. And that's the problem you run into is oftentimes people in bureaucracies, leadership particularly, are reluctant to try something daring because they're worried about the effect it'll have on their career. And so you get a lot of pushback on that. And that's what happened with the CIA. I would say 99% sure that the CIA does not have a remote viewing program. Now, there's one exception, and that's the National Security Agency. At the time, we were being trained by Ingo and Hal at SRI.
Right.
The NSA had some folks that were also being trained at the same time. We knew them. We interacted with them. And I had never heard since that the CIA canceled their program. And a whistleblower a few years back, an NSA whistleblower, alluded to the fact that the CIA still had a program like that. No details, whatever. And so I think that there's a better than even chance that the CIA or the NSA is still doing it. And I hope they are. I think it would be stupid not to at least have some work going on in this field to cover the areas where technical intelligence and more conventional intelligence can't solve the problem. So I hope they're doing it, but I can't guarantee it, but I think the odds are very high that they are.
All right. How much of the manual is rooted in your personal experience versus formalized government training methods?
None of it is rooted in my personal experiences, except as they validate what I was actually formally trained. Okay. Now, and I also have to say, I'm really the editor of it. I'm not the author of it. I mean, some of it that I'm author of, but it was a kind of a collaboration between me and my fellow remote viewing students at the time. I took advantage of their notes and their thoughts on this, plus my own notes and thoughts, and put it together to try and make it as precise and accurate as possible as to what had been conveyed to us. So I was trying to avoid actual opinions or stories or anything that was just strictly from us and not from that material that we were presented and required to learn.
All right. Yeah. Okay. No problem. Could you walk us through the structure of the manual? What skills or stages does it emphasize?
So how long is this program?
I think it's what skills and what challenges do you have to have?
So that it all has to do with trying to instill in a naive individual, in other words, one who'd never done remote viewing before, had no experience with it, trying to instill in that individual the same abilities and capacities that a long, well-practiced, successful remote viewer embodied. All right. So what that means is we go back to what remote viewing is. So the name remote viewing is unfortunately a misnomer. It's not really the best name. Ingo is the one who came up with that term, and he and I got in a couple of arguments about why that wasn't a good term. I think it should have been called remote perception. And in fact, some other researchers do call it remote perception, or did. Some of them passed on, unfortunately. But so there were a couple of folks, Brenda Dunn and Robert John at Princeton University, who had a program called the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory. And he was the dean of engineering at Princeton. So he was a heavy hitter. He was one of the leading physicists in the world, really, right? But he was very much involved and interested in this. And so they had a research thing, and they essentially replicated what had been developed at Stanford Research Institute with Hal Puthoff, Ingo Swann, Russell Targ, some of the other folks that you may or may not have heard of. They did a replication of it, and they called it remote perception, because that actually is a better term. Now, all of that is lead up to remote viewing. Remote viewing, the viewing is only one part of the picture, right? Why I think it ought to be remote perception is because you have visual experiences of the target. You can detect smells, tastes, sounds, tactiles. What am I leaving out? All of the sensory kind of information you would get if you were there present. They aren't usually quite as vivid as if you were present, but I'll get into that in a second. So what this manual is meant to do is, I'm going to back out and come in a different way. In fact, when people ask me, they say, what do you teach people when you teach them the remote view? And I say, I teach them three things. The first one is to recognize the very subtle signal that brings the information into your consciousness. Okay. The second thing I teach them is about the mental noise, all of the racket going on in your brains at any given time that serves to try and smother the signal, right?
Yeah.
And then I teach them how to tell the difference and what to do about it. Okay. And so you could say that's what the manual is supposed to do. Okay. Or at least capture the training that was given us to do that. And so in the manual, you learn how to deal with the mental noise. You learn how to deal with the signal to some degree, and you learn what to do about the noise and what to do about the signal. Now, I should add a caveat. The manual was not actually originally designed as a training manual. And so there are things that aren't in there that would have made it easier to learn remote viewing using that manual. The manual was originally designed as the only thing I can think of is a German word, Festschrift. It's a compilation of all of what we were taught, without
Right.
necessarily explaining how the experience comes through, right? And so when I teach my classes, I present what was in the manual, but then I add to it the things that they need to know to really know how to apply it, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you there. How does someone new to remote viewing begin to train their mind? Are there daily practices or exercises?
well, hmm, daily practice or exercises. Well, the best way to do it, of course, is to regularly work remote viewing targets in a blinded state. So um, the more practice you get, obviously, ultimately, as long as you're practicing correctly, the better you're going to get. It's very much like learning to play the piano or the violin or whatever. Um, the idea is you first learn the principles behind it, and then you apply those principles, and then you keep practicing and practicing and practicing, learning by the mistakes you make, and ultimately then coming to a state of proficiency, right? And that's pretty much how it works with remote viewing as well. And so doing it is probably the best thing to do on a daily basis. Although you may not want to necessarily work on a daily basis. It's good to give yourself time off. And
Yeah,
so every other day is probably about the rhythm you would want to maintain if you're trying to really excel at it. So, yeah, that's what I'd say. I mean, there are little exercises that I apply during the training process to help people understand what they're doing. Like one of my favorites is I call it the hugging a tree exercise, right?
yeah.
So what we do is when we're talking about what's called stage 2 in controlled remote viewing, that is the sensory experience of a target, the different sensory inputs you get. And I've over the years realized that humans use their senses, but they don't really pay attention to them, if you know what I mean. So if you hear a police siren and you know you're supposed to get out of the way, you hear the siren, you jump out of the way, and then you don't give any further thought. You don't think about what that actual experience was of hearing, how that sounded affected you, all that kind of stuff. You don't think about that. And normally it doesn't matter if you do. But when you're in a remote viewing environment where the bandwidth starts off as really quite narrow, maybe I should explain that. So I talk about narrow versus wide bandwidth, and borrowed it from the digital world, right? So in everyday life, when all of our senses are active, we have very wide bandwidth, right?
Yeah.
Because all that information is coming in a veridical, a real connected way. When you get into the remote viewing mode, it's not coming through your senses; it's coming from the target. And who knows what coming from means here, but it's reaching you from the target. Excuse me. And activating the sensory processing centers in your brain, and then you have these experiences. But they're fairly, sometimes they're very robust. Sometimes you get a very, like, for example, you get an impression of red and it's very vivid red, and it's almost as powerful as if you're seeing it. But more often what you get is a vague sense of redness. I use this analogy. It's like a half remembered memory that is not a memory you ever had. And so it has that kind of vague quality about it. Sometimes even you just, for example, know there's red there, but you don't know how you know.
Mm.
Okay. And all of these are different ways that the information, the experiences can come to you. I'm using red as a very simple example here, obviously. And let me think, where was I going with this? Okay. So narrow, but because you have this narrow bandwidth, the information is coming in much less pronounced, in a much less pronounced way. And so you have to learn how that subtle input, how that feels, what that experience is like, in order to allow you to sort out that from the noise that's going on. Okay. And so it helps if you understand better what sensory experience is like in the real world. So what I do is I take my students, I load them up in the car, I take them out to some outdoor place somewhere. I usually try and pick a place that's really quite impressive from a sensory perspective. Maybe a mountain or a park or something like that, right? And here I live here in the Utah desert, and we have a Native American site about 20 minutes down the road, out in the desert.
Yeah.
And there's these rock cliff walls, and you always hear birds and all kinds of stuff, And I
Really?
take them out there, and I make them actually feel the rocks, feel the vegetation, smell the vegetation, describe the colors that they are observing, pay attention to those colors, feel the wind, we don't taste anything out there because who knows what's shit, right? But we
Yeah.
have a part of this exercise where we go to an indoor location and we do taste things, right? So they get there and they have this very actually quite vivid experience. It's like usually they've never really tried to engage with their senses before in this way, and it's just amazing. It's like it's eye-opening, it's mind-opening. They love this experience because they've never hugged a tree before to try and understand that sensory experience, and
Mm.
it helps them later when we get into that part of the remote viewing process, identifying the sensory experiences you're having that then help you put the pieces together to get a better notion of what the target is, right? Because every time we have a physical thing, it's built of our sensory experience. Our recognition of it is built entirely of our sensory experience, because that's how we understand and relate to the physical world, right?
Yeah. I think I've got another question from Rebecca again. Do you think knowing how to quiet the mind through meditation could help you?
So, first of all, I want to say, Rebecca, you're a real trooper here. So, yes. Now, first off, we don't really try to quiet our mind in remote viewing. The problem is if you're trying to shut it down, like some meditators, they want to have a totally blank mind. Well, you don't want that because the data is supposed to be coming in too. And if you blank your mind, you're truly getting rid of the noise, but you're also getting rid of the data, right? And so we don't try and quiet our minds. We try to manage the noise. But your question about meditation is actually useful here because there's been a lot of research that show There's been some research, at least, that shows that people who have become proficient meditators actually have a lot of success in psychic tests. Now, meditation in and of itself isn't a psychic ability, but learning how to kind of discipline your mind, learning how good habits in terms of calming and all that kind of thing, that apparently the evidence seems to show that can make learning an application of consciousness like remote viewing, make that a lot more easy. Now you can do it even if you're not a meditator, but meditators seem to be able to grasp it in a much quicker way and apply it in a much quicker and more effective way. So being a meditator, learning meditation, and I would suspect even doing a little meditation is probably helpful if your ambition is to go on and learn this kind of thing as well.
Right, let's move on a little bit. Oh yeah, I've got a good one here as well, I think. Looking back at what you think the government remote viewing program achieved, and what do you think it failed to achieve?
Well, the first thing it achieved, and this it wouldn't have achieved if it hadn't been canceled and declassified. Some people will say, well, why did the CIA have to cancel it? Why don't we keep doing it in the government and all that stuff? And I said, hey, listen, I wouldn't be talking to you about this if the CIA hadn't canceled it and declassified it. So that was a blessing, actually, more than any kind of a disadvantage. The declassification made it possible for for us to teach this, to talk about it, and which is a good and a bad thing, because some of my colleagues, let's just say, have gone beyond truth in trying to make things more exciting, right? That's one thing. Actually, I was talking to a potential client this morning, and I pointed this out. When you start looking up remote viewing on the internet, you have to be careful, because not everything you read there is accurate. In fact, oftentimes it's totally false. I told him, I said, if you see something there that seems too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. There are a lot of real things and good things about remote viewing you can find out about on the internet, but there's also a lot of nonsense, sadly, a lot of nonsense. So you just be cautious and always try and vet whatever you read before you believe it. So anyway, so that's a side bet. Now, where were we? I forgot what question I was asking.
Where are we now? What do you think failed to achieve?
Oh, right. So let's go back to the success. So first thing, although the world would not have known about this if the CIA hadn't revealed the program, the program successfully demonstrated that this stuff is real, right? It showed, skeptics will deny that, but they do not know what they're talking about. I guarantee you, they do not know what they're talking about. The evidence is now in that this stuff is real, that psychic functioning is real. Doesn't mean all of it's real, but it does prove. They have essentially proved in all the research and the operational stuff we did, we've essentially proved that it really does work, that it's a real thing, a real phenomenon. And then, of course, it comes to figure out how much of it is that's said about it is true and how much isn't. But we've essentially proved that. And again, if the CIA had not declassified, we would not know about that. The world would not know about that. If anything, it's probably the most important thing that is accomplished. Well, there's something else that it does, because there's a further entailment here, and that is that the fact that it's real tells us something about human nature that many of us knew, but no one could establish. It shows that the human being is more than its physical representation. This is the thing that Bob Monroe, the Monroe Institute, for those of you who may be familiar, he says one of his affirmations is something along the lines of, we are more than our physical minds, right? Their physical selves. And this is really good evidence that that's true. So those I'd say were the things we accomplished. What did it fail at? Well, it's only a temporary failure. Hopefully it's only temporary. It failed at actually teasing out all of the mysteries that are present in this. And when I say mystery, I mean in a kind of a scientific way. There's a lot of things you don't know about it. We don't know how it works. We know how well, when you say how it works, there's actually two meanings to that. One is how it works means what you do to actually accomplish something with it, right? That's one way of how it works. The other way how it works is we don't know the causal mechanism. I think the reason for that is that when we talk causal mechanisms, we are usually talking in terms of some physicalist explanation, like everything else we are familiar with in magnetism or electromagnetism, disease vectors, all that kind of stuff. These are all things that used to be thought of as being mysterious, and now we know there are physical explanations for these things. We have not found a physical explanation for ESP or parapsychology, parapsychological phenomena.
Right.
And I don't think we ever will, because I don't think they're physically based. I think they involve the physical in some way, but the actual causality, the actual causations going on here is a non-physical thing, which of course the scientific world rejects the possibility that there's anything that isn't physical, but I think it's wrong. I think that the ESP and so on is evidence that there is a non-physical element to the universe. So anyway, there you go. That's one of my soapboxes, as you can tell.
If the government were to revisit psychic research now, what would you advise them to do differently?
I don't know if I would advise them to do anything differently. I mean, you have to know the research or the history of all of this to realize that it's just like any other science project, which is you you essentially throw stuff on the wall and see what sticks. So you have to start off from a position of not knowing anything
Yes.
and use the scientific method to start to feel out what's real. Okay. And start to you experiment with different things. Some things work, some things don't. It's like the old story about Edison and the light bulb. They said, well, you failed, it took you 100 tries to come up with a successful light bulb. Why did you fail so much? And he said, allegedly, he said, I didn't fail 99 times. He said, I just found 99 ways it didn't work.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's nice.
But that's
good,
kind of how this whole the biggest issue in parapsychological well, there's two issues in parapsychological research. The first one is people get involved in it and they come up with projects, they do experiments and stuff that they haven't done their homework first. They don't know what they're doing, and consequently, their experiment fails or doesn't succeed. Let's put it that way, doesn't succeed, and then they conclude that that is a counterexample to whether this stuff really works or not. It's, sometimes those counterexamples do say this doesn't work, but very often the counterexample just shows they did it wrong, right? They worked from false assumptions or mistaken assumptions. So that's one problem. But the other problem is because there's such a cultural and social stigmata about this, stigma, I guess is the right word, stigma about this. The funding for it has been constrained. There's lots of pressure not to do this kind of stuff. And if anything could be changed, it would be that we start to realize and start to understand that this is something that's worth spending resources on to try and get to the bottom of in an objective scientific way. You not start off with the already assumption that it's false, because that will lead again to false conclusions, but also not to start off with necessarily that it's real. Start off objectively. That's how you need to be. Objectively experiment in a legitimate way, get some resources to do that. And there are some things going on like that, but today, but the problem is that because mainstream science rejects it, most of the funding resources, and it does take money to do this, most of the funding resources are blocked to parapsychology research, which is a shame and actually is a scandal, in my opinion.
Right, yeah. It will be as well. What lessons from Stargate remain relevant for intelligence work for today?
Wow. That's a subject in itself. What lessons from Stargate are relevant for today? Well, I think partly that there are methodologies that aren't widely accepted that could still be useful in solving intelligence problems. And I think maybe here's the interesting thing, that there is less of a need for psychic intelligence today than there was in the 80s and even in the 90s, because the technical intelligence has seen so much improvement. Now, so for example, all the aerial surveillance stuff we had before, you just had satellites and high flying aircraft for imagery intelligence, right? Like the SR-71, the U-2. And sometimes those are still useful, but now that we've got all these drones and stuff that have high resolution cameras and all that, oftentimes we're able to answer intelligence problems that you could only have used ESP to answer before. And there's lots of other examples as well where our technology just improved to the point where you wouldn't need ESP, right? But there are still some occasions where you do. There are some things you just can't answer with any technical means. And that's probably a lesson that we should have learned but haven't. So.
Right, yeah. How long we got? Oh, we're all right. Yeah. How do you see the future of remote viewing training evolving?
Evolving training, future remote viewing training evolving. Well, I think that quality can be enhanced by the more we learn about the learning process, the human learning psychology, neuroscience of learning, and such. My training program has already been enhanced by all that. I learned an awful lot when I was going to graduate school after I retired from the Army. I of course, got my PhD in philosophy. I like to joke, I have a PH squared D. I have a doctorate in philosophy in philosophy, right?
All right.
But my supporting coursework, I chose to study psychology of learning. And I had some neuroscience courses, some regular behavioral, what did they call it? The behavioral psychology of learning or something like that. And courses like that. And those were extremely helpful in helping me understand better ways of conveying the concepts and conveying the skills that that are essential to the remote viewing process. And so there's certainly many more improvements possible as we learn more about how humans learn things. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, well, this is a mixed bag here. One of the problems with the remote viewing world is that people keep coming online and offering new programs, new courses and stuff. I can teach you remote viewing in a weekend, or I can teach you remote viewing, over Zoom or whatever. And there's some truth to that. You can learn some about remote viewing over a weekend. You can learn fairly well over Zoom, but there are some things that are very difficult to teach over Zoom, for example. The problem is oftentimes these folks come out, they've taken one course from somebody else, and they think that makes them an expert. And so they set up this course. They get a website because it's cheap and easy to do a website, right?
Yeah.
Cheap and easy to do a website. And so they'll offer this. And so you get this huge plethora of remote viewing training programs. And it becomes really hard kind of to tease out which ones are legitimate and which ones aren't. Okay. One of the markers that I suggest is, if you come up on a website that offers remote viewing training or even operations, if you go to the about thing and it doesn't tell you who is behind it, or if it does tell you who is behind it, but it doesn't tell you how they gain their expertise, that's almost certainly to be a fly-by-night operation. Okay. If you can't vet it, don't touch it. It's that you need to be able to do your homework, research, find out if they're quality, find out what their background is, find out if it makes sense before you give them money, or even before you do it for free, right? That's the first thing to do, is find out why do they think they're qualified to teach remote viewing. The other thing to be aware of is that even some of the better known people out there, and I'm not going to give any names here, but some of the better known people out there aren't actually qualified either. They've kind of developed their own approach, and it hasn't necessarily been scientifically informed. And even if they say it's scientifically informed, isn't necessarily. You have to vet it. Now, let me suggest my book. I don't know if you were going to mention that or not, but I have a book out there, and it's available in Amazon UK. It's called. Let me grab it just a second.
The Enemy.
Well, I have one called Reading the Enemy's Mind. It's available on Kindle, but I don't know if it's that. But this is the one that I think is more useful to folks. It's called The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing.
Yeah.
Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. The subtitle is The Secret Military Remote Perception Skill Anyone Can Learn. Okay. The goal of this book is to introduce people to remote viewing who maybe don't know a lot about it yet. It also serves a secondary function of being a book you can give to your relatives or friends who think you're crazy for being involved in remote viewing. It's written in a very no-nonsense, straightforward, but still very readable way to explain all kinds of different elements about remote viewing. And there's a chapter in there about how to pick a teacher that gives you all the criteria that you should check on before you agree to work with someone in learning how to do this process. And so I highly recommend this book, The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. And yes, it's my book, so I'm biased, right? But I have to tell you, I'm not recommending it so I'll get rich, because nobody gets rich with books anymore except
No.
maybe some really big name authors.
Yeah.
This book is literally, very honestly intended as an educational service to people out there. I have to charge money for it because otherwise I couldn't afford to do it, right?
Correct.
But I'm not trying to sell you a book. I'm trying to help you get a really good grasp of what remote viewing actually is about, and help you also, incidentally, to figure out if you want to do it or not. There's a couple of chapters in it on how to do a basic remote viewing experience, and which there's a video of actually up on my YouTube channel. I don't know if you want me to mention that right now or not.
Yeah, you can do. Yeah.
Okay.
No problem.
You go to YouTube, and the YouTube channel is remote viewing / remote perception, right? And if you've been listening, you know why I added the remote perception to that. But it's the remote viewing / remote perception channel, and on there is a link to a video called "How to Do a Simple Remote Viewing," and I think folks will find that helpful as well.
Yeah, one of the questions I was going to ask you before we got Ed, if someone listening today wanted to explore remote viewing, what's the first step you would recommend?
Yeah, well, the first step is to try and understand a little bit about it. Again, you've got to worry about whether you get on the internet, whether what you're reading is legitimate or not. Mark Twain once said he didn't read health books because he was afraid he'd die of a misprint. Right. And so you do have to be careful what you read on the internet. But my book, Essential Guide to Remote Viewing, was actually written with that in mind, that people have a hard time finding a go-to place to give them legitimate, trustworthy information about remote viewing. And so I guess if I was going to suggest first step, that book. I mean, you could go to my website too, which is rviewer.com, rviewer.com. You could go there. That's of course geared towards my 4-pay training program, but there's also a blog on there where I write a lot about. There's a lot of free stuff available on there, so that's a place to go to. But the book is really handy. It's a one-stop shop kind of.
Yeah. So do you think it's gone quiet on remote viewing now then?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow what.
It's gone really quiet on remote viewing all over the world now.
Quiet as in radio silence?
A lot of people not doing it.
Oh, no, it's all over the place. And in fact, remote viewing has now become, again, it goes up and down, right? Sometimes they're less about it, sometimes they're more. But right now it's in the upswing here, largely because of the UAP stuff, the UFO stuff. Yes. We have probably today more credible evidence for the existence of these things, of UAPs, UFOs, than we've ever had before, or at least been publicly available before. It has some really good evidence. So I don't want to talk about that right now. But because of that, people are interested in remote viewing as well. It's kind of like the two kind of come together in a way, and the interest in one then leads people to an interest in the other. So it's actually, there's quite a bit going on out there today in the remote viewing world. There are some very busy remote viewing related websites. I'm not sorry, Facebook groups.
Yeah.
I have one myself, which again is the remote viewing / remote perception Facebook group, right? There's some others, and there's some good stuff on those, and there's also some crazy stuff. So just caveat emptor, read carefully. But there's
Paul, do you do any Zoom meetings yourself then with people?
So I do sometimes. And I may be doing a few more. I don't do my serious remote viewing training via Zoom, but I do workshops sometimes. I do presentations, lectures, and of course I do a lot of interviews. Those are also, a lot of them are linked on my YouTube channel. but I do actually every year. Usually, I do a course, online course for the Rhine Research Center, which is the oldest parapsychology association or organization in the United States. Um, and I'll do an introductory remote viewing. I do dowsing and I do precognition.
Oh, brilliant.
Rotate those, right? Yeah, and so I mean that's a place you can get online instruction. It's not the heavy duty, fully leaded version that I teach in person, but it does get your feet wet. Yeah,
Do you ever come to the UK then?
I have occasionally. I was over there in 2006 to do a 2-day remote viewing workshop seminar for Lynn McTaggart, if people know who she is.
Yeah.
I was over there in 2019 to talk to the Society for Psychical Research. We talk to their conference and give some
Oh,
lectures and stuff.
brilliant.
I was over in Scotland in 2008 in Glasgow to and taught a remote viewing course there. When else have I been there? Seems like I've been there a couple other times, but I'm not remembering now. I would love to come over there and actually do a course, a fully vetted remote viewing training course
That would be
in the
interesting. That
UK.
would.
Yeah, I have to warn people though I'm very expensive, and I'll admit that up front. I'm very expensive, but that's because
Yeah.
of the energy and the time and everything I put into these courses, and I limit my student base to 2 students per instructor. So if I have more than 2 students, I bring in an assistant that I have vetted, who I know knows what they're doing. And
Mhm.
if I have more than 4 students, I bring in another one. And I limit my courses to 6 students. It's a very intense, very learning rich kind of environment. So
And how many is that for a week or so many
yeah,
days?
yeah. So at least here in the States, and it varies depending on the circumstance when I'm overseas. I have been to Germany and 3 times taught courses over there. Hope to go back again if I can talk my wife into letting me leave.
Ah,
But here in the States, I run it Monday morning all the way through mid afternoon on Saturday. And it's all of those days, and they're full days. Some in the winter, I teach down in Vegas because up here where I live in Cedar City, you could get snowed in the winter months.
ah,
But Vegas, you'll never get snowed in, I guarantee you.
no,
But
guaranteed that.
but when I teach down there, now I forgot why I started to tell you that.
It was about the courses and what you can do.
Yeah, I know I was talking about courses, but why did I bring up Vegas? Okay, so when I'm here or in Vegas, I start on a Monday, go all the way. Oh, I remember why. Because people sometimes come thinking in the evenings they'll be able to go down to the strip, in Vegas and play cards or something, or slot
Oh,
machines or
yeah.
whatever. They do not have that chance. My course is very intensive. Sometimes the classroom part will last till maybe 7 at night. Sometimes it depends partly on how easily students pick this stuff up. But
Yeah,
if
of course it
I
is.
don't quit until I feel like they've got the best they can, and so sometimes we'll go to 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night, and then you have homework. You have no time to play during my classes. Yeah, it's serious business.
That sounds brilliant. Now, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, I think my website is the best way. There's on all the sub pages, there's a contact box that tells you how to email me and so on. So, and again, the website is rviewer.com, RVIEWER.com. That's the remote viewer without the space and without the emote.
You're right.
rviewer.com.
And again, where can they get your books?
So I know for a fact you can get Essential Guide on UK Amazon. Okay. My other book, my first book, Reading the Enemy's Mind, which is
Mm.
also, in my opinion, a very good book about this. It's available on Kindle, but I don't know if it's available outside of the United States on Kindle. You'd have to try that. I have no control over that book. Essential Guide, I fully control, but Reading the Enemy's Mind actually is owned technically by a mid-level publisher. In fact, Tor Books, Tom Doherty Books, which is Tor and Forge, are their 2 imprints.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so They have it. They've never turned over the copyright to me because I'd love to bring it out again in hard copy, but it's just Kindle these days. So,
all right.
yeah.
No problem. No problem. Well, thank you again for coming on the show. It's been very interesting.
Well, I was happy to do it. We'll see if we get a chance later on sometime to do it again.
Yeah, in the new year sometime. Over the, next year sometime. Are you writing any? Are you going to do another book?
Yep. I've got a couple in the works. One of them is I haven't decided on a title because I haven't decided how many of these things to have, but it's going to be something like 10 ways to improve your remote viewing or something like that. So that's intended for people who are already into it, right?
Yes,
There's
yeah.
another one I'm working on, but I can't tell you what it is yet.
Because, brilliant.
Yeah, I can't tell you what it is. And that's not because I don't want to. I always have to be careful I don't spill the beans, but I'm going to have some folks working on it, content for it, and they can't know what it is yet. So I don't want them to accidentally find out. So
yes, I agree with that as well. Yeah. Well, thank you, Paul. It's been lovely. Thank you to Rebecca and everybody in the chat room for the questions. It's always great when there's some more different questions to come forward.
So is there a chat? Is it possible for you to send me a copy of that so I can see what other questions we didn't get around to and stuff?
Yeah, no problem. I'll send it to you.
Okay, great. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You betcha. I will. It just snowed, so I got to go shovel some snow. So.
Oh no.
All right, good. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Paul. It's been absolutely fascinating subject. I love it. See you again soon.
Look forward to it.
Bye.
Bye. I got to figure out how to turn this off. I don't know how to turn this off. I guess I could do this. All right, we'll see you. Bye.
See you later.